Hello and welcome to the Tough Girl podcast, which is all about motivating and inspiring you. I'm your host, Sarah Williams. Today, I'm delighted we're going to be speaking to Susan Conrad, who has kayaked the Inside Passage, a journey of 1,200 miles down the western coast of North America from Anacortes, Washington to Alaska. During the 66 days that Susan was out there, she experienced the astounding power and beauty of nature, paddling in drenching rains, fierce winds, and violent seas. During this podcast, Susan shares more about her journey, why she decided to take on the challenge, and what she's learned from the experience. Hi, Susan.
Hey, how's it going, Sarah?
Very well, thank you, very well. Now, before we started recording, you gave an incredible description of where you're currently based, and it sounded amazing. So you just want to tell everybody where you're currently located?
Yeah, right now I am finding myself in a funky two-story farmhouse on a smallish island named Lummi Island, which looks out onto the San Juan Islands in Washington State. So I'm in the Puget Sound. I can almost see the very beach where I took the first strokes of this journey, my through paddle of the Inside Passage.
Oh my God, that's absolutely fantastic. Now, Susan, for those who are listening who maybe haven't heard about you and the challenges that you've done, how would you introduce yourself?
Well, I'd say that I've always been a very independent and outdoorsy sort of person. And I think that spirit of adventure was groomed in me as a really young child growing up on a small farm in upstate New York. And I remember my parents worked a lot, and I don't honestly ever recall having a babysitter, so I was pretty much unsupervised most of the time. And I had acres and acres of fields and woods and all these little marshes and creeks and ponds and just nooks and crannies where a child could just easily be entertained. And I would disappear for hours and even entire days and just have, untold adventures, these little mini solo adventures that I would disappear on. But it's funny, as outdoorsy and curious as I was really not an athletic child. I was quite the opposite. And I was the classic textbook klutz. I was one of those kids that was often picked close to last by the team sports captains because I couldn't dribble a ball or slide into home base to save my life. And it was a bit humiliating for me. And I think that's why I gravitated more toward the individual sports, such as running and cycling and then eventually paddling. And it wasn't until my college years that I got into paddling. This is going back a fair ways, the mid to late 80s. And I stumbled onto the university in Southern Oregon, their outdoor program. And I was lured in by all these colorful rubber rafts and tents that were displayed out in the grass one day and stuck my head into the outdoor program and just like, hey, what do you guys do? What's this all about? And the rest, as they say, is history. From that point forward, I found myself getting very involved with the university's whitewater rafting program, and that quickly led to getting involved in whitewater kayaking because I started, from the vantage point of these big lumbering rafts, spotting these little nimble whitewater kayaks darting in and out of the smaller river features, and I thought, wow, that looks like a lot more fun. And I quickly recognized the autonomy. And it just seemed like a lot more fun way to get out on the water. So about a year after I graduated from university, I moved to Northwest Montana and got into whitewater kayaking in a much bigger way, upping the ante with my skills and eventually running bigger and bigger rivers. But it wasn't until a close friend put me in one of those long, skinny sea kayaks that was just a huge game changer for me. And I quickly recognized sea kayaking's potential for solitude and adventure. And I just went, full bore with it. I ended up getting certified as a professional guide and an instructor, worked for an outfitter in Montana for about 10 years, and then started my own paddle sports company, which I ran for about another 10 years. And that background, that eventually gave me the skills and the confidence, I think, to make this commitment to paddle the Inside Passage.
Oh, it's absolutely fantastic, because when you're talking, you can really hear the passion in your voice, and it's so exciting that you actually found this passion for paddle sports. I almost just want to take you back actually to when you were whitewater rafting down these big rivers, when you became a guide and an instructor. What was that like for you?
Well, at first, particularly from the rafting standpoint, I found it quite terrifying. I mean, it was exhilarating, but it was also terrifying because, I realized that I'm essentially responsible for these people's lives in that craft. And again, that's why I think I gravitated more toward the individual sports, where I'm pretty much just responsible for me, myself, and I. And that could be a handful at times. And also, for decades, I thoroughly enjoyed bringing folks out from landlocked Montana to the San Juan Islands and the Gulf Islands up in British Columbia, and just introducing them to this wonderful world of multi-day paddling. But same sort of thing. I was just always kind of on edge, and you're always on the clock, and just worried that I would make the wrong decision, or someone would have a poor experience. And again, that's why I think I really was so taken by this whole solo experience, where I can do what I want when I want, and I'm not responsible for someone else's safety.
I was to say, there can be a huge amount said for that, to almost be a little bit selfish, just focus on what you want to do. So tell everybody a little bit more about the Inside Passage, especially if they're not local to the States. Where is the Inside Passage? Why did it catch your fancy?
Yeah, the Inside Passage, it's an extraordinary coastal route, and it has its beginnings in the southern reaches of the Puget Sound in Washington State. So, sort of like the bowels of the Seattle, Tacoma areas where it begins. And then it winds its way through the San Juan Islands for just a brief stint, and pretty quickly crosses over into Canada, into British Columbia. And then it pulses its way up the entire British Columbia coastline until, for about, I'd say 700 miles, give or take. And then it finally crosses into the Alaskan Panhandle. And it ends in a charming community called Skagway, about 1,300 miles later, where you literally just run out of ocean. The Inside Passage ends right there in Skagway. And it's just a phenomenal route. It's got some of the most spectacular fjords and complex coastlines in the world. And I'd been introduced to just snippets of it, like maybe a 50-mile stretch here and a 100-mile stretch there, when I would go out with friends. And I had, in particular, one mentor. I think anyone that's done anything somewhat substantial in their lives had a mentor or a guide at one point. And mine was a man named Jim Chester, and he had paddled the Inside Passage, also solo, in 1992. And he was a huge inspiration for me to do the same, and introduced me to these little sections of it. And, at that time I had no desire to paddle the entire thing. It was like, I thought that was way out of my league, but, time changes, life throws you curveballs here and there. And eventually I felt this deep desire to connect the dots. And that's essentially what I did.
What changed for you?
Well, just shortly before committing to taking on this challenge, my life, was really this combination of circumstances that was unraveling in my life. My father had recently died. I had actually watched him wither into this catatonic slump from the advanced stages of Alzheimer's, and then he finally passed. So that was a very painful time for me. And then about that same time, a close friend had also passed away, and then another close friend who was sort of my rock had moved away. And gosh, I sound like a country western song. Also, my cat had gotten eaten by a coyote, and my long-term relationship had fallen apart, and I was running this paddle sports business at the time, but I was making poor choices with my life and spending a lot of time indoors, falling under that that issue of working in the outdoor industry indoors. So behind a desk a lot, developing a lot of the curriculum, doing a lot of stuff in the boatyard, and not getting my saltwater fix. So I was getting pitifully out of shape, eating way too much, probably drinking way too much. And I guess I was just at a point where I needed a new goal. I just had to mix things up and press that reset button. And I've always been a very goal-oriented person. And the Inside Passage came on my radar, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to do this. I need to mix things up.
Was it an instant change for you? Getting that goal, deciding, actually, I'm going to go and kayak the Inside Passage. Did that suddenly switch something for you in terms of, exercising, eating right, getting out from behind your desk, instead of making the poor choices, making the better choices for you? Or is that more of a gradual change?
I wouldn't say it was an overnight change, but things happened pretty quickly after that. Once I made this commitment and then I started blabbing it to people, then I thought, wow, okay, there's no turning back. No, there's no turning back now. It was like this fierce determination that started coursing through my veins. And, from that point forward, I was very, I've always been a very driven, goal-oriented person, and just making that decision to myself, press that reset button. I'm like, okay, I'm doing this. And I spent the better part of 10, 11 months preparing for it. So I was very, very determined. And I figured, since I was doing this solo, that I would have the best chance for success if I was prepared. And so I prepared, of course, physically, mentally, logistically, even on an emotional level. So it was sort of an immediate reaction, and also over time preparing so that when I finally approached that starting line, that I was feeling reasonably confident that I could pull this off.
So I love how you've broken it down into those 4 areas, because I always go, you've got the physical preparation, you've got the mental preparation, and then I like how you have like logistically. And then the one thing that I always end up forgetting is like the emotional preparation. That's something that I didn't do for one of my last challenges, the Appalachian Trail. But out of those 4, which was the most challenging for you?
Oh boy, they were all extremely time consuming. The most challenging, the logistics, was very, very complex. And a big part of the logistics, entailed acquiring and understanding, just wrapping my brain around the route and how I was going to manage these 1,200 miles and acquiring all of those charts. And I ended up needing a total of 32 charts for the entire route. So that took a fair amount of time. I decided to break the 1,200-mile route down into 7 sections. So it was 7 manageable chunks that were structured around these 6 resupply ports of call that I would paddle into to retrieve my supplies that were mailed ahead, typically to the post offices in those towns. So that took a fair amount of plotting and planning. And my friend Jim, my mentor, came down and visited with me for many, many days and pored over these charts with me and made suggestions and gave me waypoints of specific campsites that he had actually stayed at on his through paddle, and was extremely helpful on that level. Physically it was also a challenge for me because I was in pretty poor shape at the time, and I just, since I was going solo, I wanted to be in tip-top shape. I felt like I would have a better chance for success, and so I logged hundreds upon hundreds of training miles paddling, and I also cycled a fair amount, and I did a lot of trail running. I joined a gym, which is just not my cup of tea, but it really helped in terms of building my core up. And I also weaseled myself into every yoga class that I possibly could, just so that I would work on that strength and flexibility and balance. So very focused on the physical aspect. The mental and emotional aspects, I think that was more, I'm a firm believer in positive visualization. So that was really just about, centering myself and tasting and feeling and seeing what it would actually be like to successfully have my bow scrub up on shore at the quote unquote finish line. And I think emotionally it was more just about being really clear on what my intent was with this journey. And so all those elements together really, took up an entire 10, 11 months to feel like I was ready to have a go at it.
I mean, it's a huge amount of preparation to take on something like this. How long was the actual expedition in total?
It was 66 days on the water. The entire time that I was gone from home was about 75, if you include the I was living in Northwest Montana at the time. So the drive to the West Coast, the final days of last minute logistics, the expedition itself, then waiting for the Alaska ferry to take me back to Washington State, and then the drive back. But yeah, it was 66 days on the water. And according to my GPS, it was 1,148 miles.
Amazing. I mean, thinking back to before you set off, how was your imagination in terms of, were you dealing with any fears or concerns or anything that you knew you were going to have to really sort of face up to?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I knew what I was getting into, in a sense, and, that, but I didn't know how it was going to play out, of course. And that's what makes it an adventure, right? The outcome is never known. But yeah, as a woman traveling alone on the Inside Passage, I entertained a lot of fears, but I think because I was so almost incorrigibly prepared that a lot of those fears were mitigated. And, I approached it pretty much how I approach life, very methodically and pragmatically. But, once I got underway, there were lots of things that had materialized that were causing me concern. And my strategy with that was what I refer to as compartmentalizing fear, and just constantly having this conversation with myself that there's a difference between fear and being scared. And for me, it's like, fear is this unpleasant emotion or sensation in your body that's typically associated with a belief that something or someone is a threat. So, in other words, it really hasn't happened yet. It doesn't really exist. And being scared is an in-the-moment feeling that's caused by an actual threat. So like that bear really is right outside my tent door, or a ship is like ready to mow me down, or I found myself in the water. I've capsized, and wow, I've got to deal with this. So that was my tactic when I would get scared out there or have these fears, is, to acknowledge them and not dismiss them. But it's like, hey, is this just a perceived threat, or is this something that's really happening that I need to deal with right here, right now?
Oh, I love exactly how you frame that. That's there's so many truth bombs in there, especially around fear. But take us back to the day you started on this 66-day expedition. Lowering your kayak into the water. What was that like for you?
It was a remarkable feeling. It was one of those natural highs that I don't think I can ever replicate. And I really have 6 of my dearest friends that were my send-off crew to thank for that whole poignant launching ceremony. They came from all corners of the United States and from Canada to see me off on this adventure. And we did the obligatory bottle of champagne and christened my bow, and everyone went around in a circle and said something, dear from their hearts, deep from their hearts, and in regards to, a safe journey and a safe return. And, everybody had their hands on the boat, and as a group, we carried my 18-foot kayak from the beach in Anacortes, Washington, down to the water and set it in the water, and had another little ceremony. And I finally got into that cockpit and took my first strokes. And of course that was all documented. And the funniest thing that I'll never forget is I was probably less than 20 strokes into the expedition. And my friends are, of course, still standing on the beach behind me, watching me eventually disappear. But I'm about 20 strokes into it, and I'm just going around this small dock where some fishermen were putting in their boat. And they must have been witnessing this little ceremony off to the side, and they were really curious. So as I'm cruising by them, one of them shouts out, "Where are you headed?" And I just like deliberately paused, freeze framed my paddle out of the water, and cocked my head to one side and looked at them. And I just very matter-of-factly said, "Alaska." And I'm just like laughing to myself, and then just carried on. And as I paddled away, I just wondered if they really got that, what was going through their minds. But it was just, and as I worked my way through the San Juan Islands, that first day out of the starting gate, I was like this racehorse, just high on adrenaline, and I was very fit, very confident. It was good weather for the first several weeks of the trip. And I was just like, wow, I'm doing this. I'm just prepared. It's great weather. The sun is shining. I've got a tailwind. I'm working my way through the beautiful San Juan Islands. And tomorrow I'm going to be in British Columbia. It's like, how cool is that?
Oh, very, very cool. I mean, I can hear the excitement in your voice, and it sounds, idyllic and beautiful and stunning. How soon did reality set in? Or when did you start to think, whoa, what have I taken on here? What is happening?
Oh, boy. Yeah, you've got to pay the piper someplace, don't you? And that was always sort of on the back of my mind. And yeah, I didn't even have to pitch my rain tarp for, I think, the first 10 days, maybe even 2 weeks. And it wasn't until I got into Johnstone Strait, which is it's about a 70-mile long stretch of water, very narrow stretch of water that runs along the eastern shoreline of Vancouver Island in British Columbia. And all my research showed that it's just notorious for funneling winds and big seas. And that proved to be true when I traversed up its length. And it was rather schizophrenic the entire time that I was on it. And this is where my first pivotal lesson was being handed to me was, patience. The sea was trying to teach me patience. And I think since I'd had such good luck right off the bat that I was getting a little cocky and definitely pushing my luck there and pushing those boundaries. And the conditions were picking up. I'm listening to my VHF radio, which is predicting, worsening conditions. But, I wasn't really listening. I wasn't listening to my intuition. And there were opportunities where I could have gotten off the water and made camp. But it's like, oh, I'm making good time. The wind is more or less at my back. I'm just going to keep going and putting on these miles. And eventually the wind veers a little bit, and so now it's coming at the side. It's more like a stern quartering seas, which can be a kayaker's nemesis because you can't really see what's heaving up your stern and trying to throw you off balance. So I'm starting to spend an inordinate amount of time and energy trying to stay upright and balanced. And then I'm constantly looking for a place, okay, where can I get off the water? And so this scenario played out for several hours, and I finally spotted a little tiny pocket beach where I came in and had this really, really ugly surf landing. And I thought I had broken the boat in half and just got out as quickly as I could and yarded the kayak up on the beach and proceeded making camp that night. But it was about maybe 45 minutes into this process where I stood up high above the high tide line and just stopped making camp and looked out at Johnstone Strait and just saw that the seas had nearly tripled in size, and it was just quite angry out there. And that's when I realized that I was really pushing my luck. I needed to cool my jets a little bit and not push quite so hard, because it wasn't a very smart thing to be doing. So things had changed there, and they would kind of toggle back and forth between what I refer to as a lot of magical moments and a lot of miserable moments, or a few miserable moments. And a lot of people ask me, well, what was the most harrowing experience of the entire trip? And that would put me in a place, about a 50-mile trough, 50-mile long trough of water in British Columbia known as Grenville Channel. And it's just this very long, narrow, steep-walled fjord. It's about 150, maybe 200 miles south of the Alaskan border. And while I was working my way up Grenville Channel, like again, the weather had changed. The seas had gotten very snotty. There was, gale force winds most every day, and the winds are just funneling down these steep walled cliffs, and just sort of like this Maytag cycle where it's rebounding off the cliffs, and there's really no place to get out. Like places to land, let alone camp, were almost non-existent. And so I'm on the third day, as I'm working my way up the ditch, I'm practically eaten alive by black flies. So my face is literally disfigured from this just horrific evening of the black flies just taking over my camp and mercilessly biting me, and my eye is swollen, my lip is swollen. So I'm quite miserable. I'm not taking care of myself. I'm not hydrating well. I'm not stopping to eat like I should, probably because there are no places to get out. And so I'm becoming mildly hypothermic. And paddling along, I'm looking at my chart, trying to figure out where the heck can I get out and set up camp. And time after time after time, I would spot this little pocket beach on my chart and come around the corner. Oh, it's going to be right there. And there would be a mama grizzly bear with cubs. And this scenario played out over and over again. It's like, I'm not even going to get out to pee here, let alone, have a snack or set up camp. So that ended up with me having to paddle these ridiculously long distances. And just when I'm about at my wit's end, this is my last day trying to work my way out of Grenville Channel. I ended up paddling 40 miles. And just they weren't an easy 40 miles either. They were quite arduous. And I was, up until that point, I had been averaging probably 20 to 25 miles a day, with not a whole lot of effort. But this was a very intense, extremely difficult 40 miles. So I was just at my wit's end when I finally ended up with this, just settling on this extremely marginal campsite like this. Oh, you've got to totally be kidding me that I've got to make camp here. And this torrential downpour just came out of nowhere. The winds are picking up. There's really no place to take shelter. It's just this big, open, marshy, boggy area, probably the equivalent of 2 football fields that I had to schlep the kayak and all of the gear to above the high tide line. And that's where I just lost it. I just started screaming at the top of my lungs like this raving lunatic of a mad woman. And I'm just screaming at everything, at the wind, at the rain, at really at nothing, but just how everything was going so south on me. And I think in the process of screaming, and I actually had my hand on my VHF, the button on my VHF radio, and I was also simultaneously rehearsing what I would say to call for help. I mean, I was done. I was just ready to call and have someone scoop me up and swaddle me in warm blankets and feed me lamb stew on their boat and take me into the next port of call, and I would take the ferry back and I would be done. But in doing so, I think that rage, that screaming, it was like this life-giving, soul-shocking rage that really pressed this mental reset button for me and just helped me, it centered myself. And I think my ego also kicked in a little bit, because now I'm thinking, oh, great. So how's this going to play out? You're going to throw in the towel. You're going to be rescued. And so, this is going to be humiliating for starters. So it just blew me away how things started to gel for me. And I became very, very methodical in my movements. And it's like, okay, Susan, you've got yourself into this situation. You need to put on your big girl panties and figure a way out. And almost miraculously, the tent went up after I'd been struggling with it for what seemed like hours. The tarp went up. I was able to get my little camp stove going and make a small hot meal for myself, and then secure all the items in the kayak, and finally climb into my tent and get into my slightly damp sleeping bag and pull my cap over my head and just take a deep breath and center myself and trust that I was going to wake up alive in the morning.
I love what you said there, that mental reset button, because I think there's always this point or this time, like during a challenge, when that was like the key learning, that was when it all happened, that reset button, I love that. And just letting it all out. And it's almost like that healing that can happen in nature. Obviously an incredible pivotal moment, going through the black flies, dealing with the bears, the downpour, the kayaking for 40 odd miles, camping in this marshy, boggy area. It's one thing after the other until it's just suddenly it wasn't anymore. So you've shared your most miserable experience, which did turn, it changed at the end. Can you think back to the most magical experience or a moment which stands out for you?
Yeah, there were so many magical moments on this trip, but if I had to pick the ultimate all-time magical moment, that would put me at my very last campsite. And I had chosen, it was a magical, clear, sunny day, no wind to speak of. And I'm only 15 miles south of my final destination, south of Juneau. And so I chose this lovely little campsite. There were no signs of bear anywhere. Easy in, easy out beach. I had a lovely little babbling brook, so getting fresh water wasn't a problem. There was brilliant pink wildflowers all over. I was like camping in this postcard. Snow-capped peaks above me, sweeping views up toward Juneau. And then for most of the evening, there was this small pod of humpback whales playing in this bay. And it was absolutely stunningly beautiful and magical. And I just remember I had one of those soft, low-slung camp chairs, and I'm just sitting in the camp chair that last night in camp, my feet burrowed into the sand, and just taking it all in, just finally realizing that, or feeling that I wasn't rushing from one chore to the next, one task to the next, one thing to the next. I'm very much a type A personality with this like get her done mentality. And much of the trip was like that. I often struggled with, wanting to settle into the experience and do more exploratory side trips and stay in camp an extra day or two, not because of bad weather, but just because I could or I wanted to. And oftentimes I didn't. I was just so pushed to move on and click off those miles and get around the next headland or the next crux move, the next danger, whatever that might be, out paddle the next, that next coming weather front or whatever the case may be. But on that last evening at that very last campsite, it was just such a blissful feeling and like this epiphany that had come over me that I could just be in the moment, that I didn't need to continually move and be and do and run. And I remember grabbing my journal and a pencil out of my tent and recording that last journal entry of the expedition. And in the process of writing that last journal entry, that's where I really started to grasp this whole concept of the outer and inner journey, meaning in addition to that obvious physical outer experience, there was definitely this more, internal sort of journey that was going on. And that's when I realized that it wasn't so much about this big goal, just being such a goal-oriented person, not just the goal of paddling the Inside Passage, but about the process of paddling that coastline and being open to everything that was placed in my path. So just a wonderful, wonderful epiphany. I guess I'm a slow learner, coming at the very last evening of the entire journey.
No, but yeah, everybody learns at different rates though, and I wouldn't say slow. I think sometimes it can take longer to get the message, because I'd say I'm very much like an A type individual, very driven. Like, let's get to the next thing, let's get to the next thing, focus, focus, focus. And sometimes you don't take that time out to appreciate, what you've done and what you've achieved. I mean, looking back now, with these, because you did the outside passage, the inside passage in 2010. So you've had, a number of years since. What are your reflections from that, or what have you learned from that experience that you've been able to apply for your life going forward?
Yeah, there are a lot of lessons that I was able to take from that journey, and over time, I've realized that the real challenge is to continually, apply those lessons to everyday life. And I think that the biggest lesson that I got out of it was, how I react to things. And there's some exceptions to this, but you can't always control those external circumstances. Like, you can't control the fact that some jerk is tailgating you, or the neighbor's dog is continually barking, or that the seas are getting bigger and bigger. But what I can control is how I react to those external circumstances. So that was a big lesson for me. And as things carry forward in quote unquote everyday life, or those tumultuous seas of everyday life, I just my Inside Passage journey has become sort of a benchmark for me, a paradigm, if you will, of my life's journey. And I just have to remind myself that, it's the same strength and courage and those epiphanies and all that awareness that came from that inner and outer journey. It's going to be that those same qualities or elements that are going to get me through whatever it is I'm dealing with in my day-to-day life. But, other lessons that I learned, which I touched on, was that whole patience thing. I'm not known for my patience, and the sea can be such a great teacher. And so I learned that I can do patience, and I learned that, that I can let go of things that no longer serve me, and just, trust in the ebb and the flow of life, just to trust that things have a way of working themselves out.
Oh, I love that. Let go of the things that no longer serve me. That's very, very powerful.
Mm-hmm.
How was it writing your book, going through that experience of, looking back over your journal, remembering back to what it was like, putting it down on paper? How was that for you?
Yeah, I always joke that paddling to Alaska was the easy part. Getting the book written, and then, of course, edited, and eventually finding a publisher and getting it out in the world and marketing it and sharing it. It has been an endurance event like none other. But one, I wouldn't trade it for the world. And I actually never intended to write a book when I set out to do this expedition. And it wasn't until, exactly a year later, I had launched on May 5th, 2010. And so May 5th, 2011, I started transcribing my journal entries. I had kept these waterproof notebooks throughout the expedition. And so on May 5th, 2011, I transcribed everything that had happened exactly a year prior, and did that every single day for the 66 days, and essentially relived that journey. And as I did that, I went through the over 5,000 images that I had taken, and had those all, in order. And I would go through those images that related to that particular day, and as well as the route. I used one of those tracking devices, so I was able to revisit those spots on Google Earth. And so essentially relived the trip every day for 66 days. And at the end of that process, I sat back and thought, well, that's not even remotely close to being a book. It doesn't really even seem that interesting. But as I started sharing my stories with these very informal slideshow presentations with friends and family, it was really, my friends and family that really urged me. They're like, "You've got such a great story here," and I think it was their encouragement that eventually set that in motion. And it wasn't until probably a couple of years later that I got really serious about it and intentionally carved out some time in my life so that I could focus on writing that book and getting it out there. And it's been an incredible journey. The doors that this memoir, this adventure memoir that resulted from the journey has opened for me.
Oh, fantastic. Are you still paddling now? Are you still getting outside and going on trips and adventures?
I am, and I'm really itching to do something, big again. Since the book's come out, I've landed this most incredible gig as a guest presenter on board one of these massive cruise liners that go up and down the Inside Passage. It's a bit incongruous with my idea of adventure, but it's also a phenomenal opportunity to share my stories and images with these people and hopefully inspire them to want to, spend as much time as they possibly can outdoors and to protect and advocate for this amazing part of the world. But in doing that job, my contract starts pretty quick, end of April, and takes me through the end of September. And so, of course, that takes up most of my summer and therefore eats up a lot of potential paddling time. So what I've set my sights on for this year, the San Juan Islands here in Washington State is pretty much my front yard. I'm looking out at the islands from my deck, any given day. And so I want to get to know my backyard or my front yard a little bit more intimately. So I've set this goal of circumnavigating as many of the San Juan Islands as I possibly can. And so it's going to be a really different goal for me because I've always been this linear paddler, going from point A to B to Z as fast as I possibly can without any exploratory side routes. And now the goal is to go around in circles essentially and just take my time and stop to relax and smell the barnacles sort of thing along the way and document that as I do that. So I'm really looking forward to that. There's approximately, if you count every rock and tiny island that's actually named on the charts, I think there's about 140 of the islands, and I've given myself the entire year to do it. So even when I'm done with the cruising season, I've got a fair amount of good weather to click off a few more islands. So yes.
Oh, that sounds fantastic. I thought you were going to say like 140 islands. I was thinking this is like an epic 10-year challenge or something that's going to take you.
Not that big of an area, but we'll see how it goes. And these will be sometimes it'll be a quick and dirty day trip. Take the ferry out to the center of the archipelago and see how many I can click off. And if I'm lucky, maybe I can sneak away for 4 or 5 days at a time in between these cruise ship sailings. And I intend to do a big chunk of it solo, but I've also put it out there to some of my paddling friends to join me for parts of it. So I'm really, really looking forward to that. I do occasionally play with other people. I don't always go off on these, selfish solo adventures.
Oh, it's good to have the balance though, and it's good to be selfish every once in a while. There's nothing wrong with that. Susan,
for sure.
Susan, where's the best place for people to find out more information about you or to get a copy of your book?
Well, just all the typical social media platforms. My website is susanmarieconrad.com. Lots of information there. And let's see, Facebook, Instagram are my two big platforms. Twitter, I'm on Twitter, but I don't spend a whole lot of time on there. And then as far as the book, Inside, One Woman's Journey Through the Inside Passage, it's there's a link to it on my website. You can get it directly from my publisher, Epicenter Press, and then all the online formats, Amazon, Barnes and Noble. It's available in all the electronic formats as well. So pretty easy to get your hands on a copy of it.
Yes,
I hope.
Absolutely. It's an amazing story. And it's got well over 100, 5-star reviews. So absolutely fantastic. But Susan, to finish off, what would be your final words of advice or words of wisdom that you can leave with our listeners, whether that's about adventure or going on a challenge or just doing something for you?
Really just getting clear on what it is that you want to accomplish, what it is that you might want out of this journey or out of a trip that you might want to do. And then set a date for it. I think that's what holds a lot of people back. It's really easy to come up with excuses of work is in the way, family, this, that, and the other. But I think if you just make it a priority, no matter, what day-to-day issues you're dealing with, just set a date, set a goal, start blabbing about it. I think like for me that worked. It's like I'm starting to tell people that I've got this goal and now I feel like I need to follow through with it. And then just go for it. Trust that you are infinitely capable of accomplishing anything that you want to in life. And that was a big takeaway for me, that, I'm really just an ordinary person, just an ordinary gal who made this commitment to bridge the gap between my dreams and reality, and the distance between my dreams and reality, that's called action. So you have to believe in yourself, follow your dreams. You have to act on that dream in order to bring that to fruition.
Oh, I agree with everything you've just said there. Susan, thank you so much for coming on Tough Girl Podcast to share more of your incredible journey and story. It has been absolutely inspiring, and you're a phenomenal role model for other women out there.
Thank you so much for having me, Sarah.
Hey tribe, how you doing? I hope you are well. Now, if you enjoyed that episode with Susan and you are interested in learning more about sea kayaking, then I've got 2 Tough Girl podcast recommendations for you. So go back and take a listen to Justine Kurgan-Venn. She is a sea kayaker and one of the top living explorers in the UK. She has been sea kayaking all over the world, from New Zealand to Newfoundland, Norway, Tasmania, the Queen Charlotte Islands, Alaska, California, you name it, she's been over there. During her podcast, we talk again a lot around fear. We talk about planning, as well as the mental tricks that she uses while she's out kayaking. So a fantastic episode. She also creates incredible videos and documentaries about her journeys, and this is done through her company called Kayak TV. We've also spoken with Erin Bastian, who is a sea and wild water kayaking expert. She has kayaked again all over the world. One of her latest expeditions, and what we talked about on the Tough Girl podcast, was her expedition over to Patagonia, where her and 2 others embarked on a 33-day self-supported kayaking adventure. I mean, again, we talk with Erin about her journey, how she got into kayaking, what she's learned along the way, how she's dealt with planning for adventures and trips, and also what it's like having to deal with the change after coming back from an expedition. She was also nominated for the World Paddle Awards as well, which is absolutely fantastic. So that was about a year ago now. So yeah, to go back and take a listen to Justine Kurgan-Venn and Erin Bastian on the Tough Girl podcast. So 2 fantastic sea kayaking adventures, well worth listening to. Now, if you are brand new to the podcast, thank you so much for listening. More information is available at toughgirlchallenges.com. On the website, you can find links to more information about me, about the merchandise that you can buy working with me, getting in contact with me, as well as more information about my challenge that I did in 2017 through hiking the Appalachian Trail in 100 days. There's also all of the episodes going back to when we started in 2015. There's over 150 now, so you can really take your time, go through the website, have a look at the posts, see who we've interviewed. We've interviewed, as well as kayakers, we've interviewed runners, swimmers, triathletes, mountaineers, explorers, expedition leaders, pilots. The list does go on. There's a huge amount of inspiration on the website, just going through and having a look. There's also, what I've started doing now as well, is releasing new blog posts. So every Friday there is a new post which gets shared, which is basically along the lines of tips and advice from previous podcast episodes. For example, over the past couple of weeks, we've had 5 tips for designing an unconventional life with Lindsay Cole. We've had how to discover your adventurous side with Charlene Gibson. Equally, we've had 7 tips to fill your life with adventure from sailor Catherine Knight. So those blog posts come out now every Friday at 7 a.m. in the morning. The Tough Girl podcast comes out at 7 a.m. UK time on a Tuesday. So there is lots happening. I've also written 3 books about my different challenges and adventures. The first one is about chalet hosting. So that's something that's of interest to you. It gives you everything you possibly need to know about heading off to work in the mountains, how to get the job, what to expect. Also, my experience from climbing Kilimanjaro. So the book is called Tips for the Top, which is an inspirational account of my quest to push myself to the limits and get the most out of life. And again, there's lots of information in the book about if you're going off to climb Kilimanjaro and what to expect. And I've also written about Marathon des Sables, running 6 marathons in 6 days across the Sahara Desert. And that's the Tough Girl Sahara Challenge. So again, there's lots of information and tells you more about my story, about my journey from city worker to adventurer. And the book is basically looking to entertain you, inform you, educate, and inspire you to think more about your own personal challenges. Now, I couldn't be doing what I am doing without the support of patrons who have been supporting me now since 2016 when I first started Patreon up, and it has made such a phenomenal difference to my life. It allows me to start earning an income, to start earning a wage, so that eventually I can move out of home, because I do live at home with my parents, who are amazing. I love to pieces, but I'm 36 years old now. I need to be able to make Tough Girl a financial viability. Passion is incredible, and being dedicated to what you do and what you love is amazing. But unfortunately, everybody does have bills to pay. Just want to give a couple of shout outs to some of my main sponsors and patrons. Louise Johnstone, thank you so much. Zoe Langley Watham, I really, really do appreciate your support. Zoe's actually been on the podcast as well, talking more about her love and passion for walking. She's a beautiful storyteller. She's got the most incredible voice to listen to as well, so well worth listening. Sarah Bright, thank you so much for being a patron. I really do appreciate your support. We've even got patrons as far away as New Zealand. So Damiana Day, who loves her walking, loves her cycling, and she's such a passionate supporter of the Tough Girl podcast. I know that everybody she meets, she'll be talking to them about the Tough Girl podcast. So thank you so much for all of your support. Abby Fitzgibbons, Rochelle Olsen, Dee Kaplinska, you ladies all absolutely rock. It's fantastic, again, to have you behind me. We've spoken with Rochelle on the podcast as well, Rochelle Olsen, about her cycling adventures and what she's learned. So well worth checking out and listening to. If you want to learn more about becoming a patron, then please do go check out Patreon, patreon.com/Tough Girl Podcast. Sign up. $2 a month, $5 a month, $10 a month, $15 a month. It all adds up. At the moment, my goal is to reach 200 patrons by the end of May, and you can help me do that. The more patrons I get on board, the more income I have coming in, the more that I can do with the podcast, the more that I can do with the Tough Girl Tribe, the more I can help to increase the amount of female role models in the media. So it's a total win-win. You're obviously getting the benefit of listening to the podcast, getting these incredible blog posts, and you can support me from $2 a month. It's less than a cup of coffee. So consider it that you're buying me a drink every single month, because that would be awesome. Thank you so much for listening. I really do appreciate your ongoing support. Best of luck with all your future challenges. Have an incredible day today. Just get out there, have some fun, give it your all, and just go for it, because I know you can do it. I believe in you. You just need to believe in yourself. All right, take care. Lots of love, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.